Europa looked flat under Jupiter's light. A hard sheet with shallow shadows, the kind that hide edges until a boot misses them. I pressed my visor to the viewport and marked the ice screws along the trench we had cut yesterday. The plume from the drill sled drifted to the right, thin and steady. If the plume bent, the wind was shifting and the radiation count would follow. We had a quiet minute. I took it. Then I checked the clock, checked the suit seal again, and clipped my tether to the rail. It was time to bring the melt probe online. Our station was a stack of 3 pressure cans with ribs and a ring of regolith bags around the base. Everyone called it a nest because it sat low and held heat. The hatch faced away from the plume vents we saw 2 days ago. Jupiter was a yellow disk behind thin cloud, bright enough that the solar mast made a shadow on the surface even though most of our power came from the reactor pack under the floor. Everything hummed at a low pitch. It felt healthy. That said more about me than the station. "Telemetry up," Mira said over the loop. Her voice was clear. She liked to keep it that way. I could picture her at the comms table with jaw set and hands cupped under the jawline, fingertips tapping the curve of her helmet. "Ananke is green, charging coil to 70. Marco, status on the cutter." "In place," Marco answered. He was already at the trench. I saw his helmet lamp flick across the sled. He liked fussing with the bracket bolts even after torque wrench ticks. He said it was superstition. He always laughed after saying it. Tensioners are tight, no play. Reyes was next to me, arms full of tether loops. He set the coil by the hatch and shook out the line so it would feed clean. He was calm, which meant the numbers on the pad had lined up in a way he liked. He was the one who joked, and he did not joke now. He only said, "We good?" "We are," I said. I clicked the power key on my wrist and watched the indicator on the sled come alive in white. Ananke hummed under the sled's covers, a steady build. The probe's nose was flush with the ice, a smooth metal dome that hid heaters, cameras, and a conical bit we did not plan to use. The plan was simple. Heat the top, melt the first meters, slide the sled in, set the rails, and let gravity and heat do the work. The tether would pay out behind, fiber and power in one bundle. We would ride the tether down with the data. We were not the first to try. The last mission had stopped at 1,300 meters when the refreeze crushed the second ring. Our probe was hotter and smarter. It pulsed heat and paused to let melt canals set. It shifted weight to drive around hard layers. It could back up if a fracture widened. And we had picked this spot with care. South edge of a chaos field. Radar-thin crust over an old channel. Plume signatures in our spectrometer last week, and tidal stress maps showing the ice flexed gently here with each pass around Jupiter. If there was a conduit to the ocean, it was under our boots. "Begin melt," Mira said. I thumbed the control and watched the dome steam. Thin vapor drew upward and froze in sheets on the windward lip of the trench. The sled shook once as the ice surrendered a thin layer, then settled. The hum deepened. The bright line on the display slid from 0 to 1 meter. We moved the sled forward a hand's width at a time. The ice took the heat and turned to a dark throat that swallowed the nose. The first 8 meters were always slow. The brine content at the top made shallow pockets that trapped bubbles. The refreeze could grip the tether if I let slack coil on the wrong side of a spur. I fed with one gloved hand, guided with the other, and kept my eyes on the readouts. Conductivity was high. That was normal for salty ice. Seismic returned clean echoes from layered sheets. The sound came back with a crisp double tap when the probe pinged. That meant no big voids. all comforting, all exactly what our models said. Reyes nudged me and pointed to the edge of the trench. A faint ripple in the ice had started a hairline crack where the sled bracket dug in. It was a small thing. We logged it anyway. I shifted the weight one notch and set a support foot to spread load. The crack sat there like a quiet question, and then stayed quiet. I breathed through my nose and tasted metal and dry air in the suit mix. Routine was a rope I tried to hold with both hands. At 20 meters, the melt channel narrowed. That was normal too. The probe's nose heated in pulses, 10 seconds on, 4 off, like a mechanical heart. The wall camera showed white glaze sloughing into dark slush that slid downward. The tether went dark and wet where it paid out. A minute later, it came up frosted again as the refreeze chased the probe's tail. I tracked power draw and heater temperature, and listened to the tone of the sled. Our world shrank to numbers and a small hot cylinder moving down into ice that had not seen surface light for more time than my tongue could count. At 90 meters, Mira said, "Pause. I want a resistivity sweep." I paused heat and sent the sweep. The return was textbook at first. Salty melt, then cleaner ice below. The last pulse came back soft. Not wrong, soft. Mira grunted over the loop. She did not like soft. Reyes said, "Could be a dusting layer. We have sulfur fall around here." "Could be," Mira said. She sounded like she had put a note in a margin. "Proceed." We pushed to 200 meters in 2 hours. The ice got uniform, which made the work easy. I settled into a rhythm. Mirror checks, tether checks, grip shifts, the probe pings stacked on the display in neat rows. Marco came up from the trench edge and stood behind me, quiet for once, just watching the numbers. His breath skated white on the inside of his visor. He had turned down his suit heat to save power for the sled. He said it reminded him of mornings on a mountain road with a snowplow passing at dawn. He said it with a small smile and a shrug. I did not ask for the story behind it. There was work. At 300 meters, the conductivity climbed again. That was good. Brine channels. The image I carried in my head was a Swiss cheese of frozen salt veins that opened more with depth. Warmth found those veins and ran down them ahead of the nose. Liquid ran back up. The probe's microphones picked up faint pops from ice crystals yielding and resealing. The world turned to tiny physics at that scale. We listened to it and made small changes to keep it from saying no. 400 meters, then 5. We reached the site where the last mission had heard knocks on the hull before the refreeze trapped the probe. Mira had the audio from that day on a file, and I had listened to it in my rack once. I thought about it now, and kept the thought on a short leash. Our hull was thicker, our heat balance models were better. We had the cutter for emergency rollback. I checked the cutter charge and said, "Cutter is green." "Logged," Mira said. I heard her pen scratch. She used a real pen on paper under plastic film. It made no sense and perfect sense. It gave her a thing to hold that was not a string of numbers. At 800 meters, the return on the resistivity sweep went odd. Not soft, not noisy, flat. The line laid down across the screen with no belly in it, and the color made my eyes cross. Reyes leaned in. "That's non-conductive," he said. "That's not brine." "Could be pocketed gas," I said, though the idea landed wrong. Gas would shift the acoustic return. Our pings were still crisp. "Or an inclusion," Mira said. "Keep going. Slow. Let's watch the acoustic." We crawled. The temperature on the nose dropped a touch as the melt got stubborn. The power climbed a fraction as the heaters pushed. The tug on the tether changed by a hair, a soft drag instead of a clean slip through water film. The camera showed dark, then pale, then a gray sheen I had not seen before. It looked dry and wet at the same time, a skin that refused to drop. The droplet formed, grew fat, and sat there instead of running. Then it rolled, not down but sideways along the wall, steady as a beetle on glass, and vanished up past the lens. "Marking that," Reyes said. His voice had dropped half a note. "Copy," Mira said. "Acoustic still clean. No voids bigger than a meter. Proceed." 900 meters. I pulsed the heat, watched the numbers, and told my mouth to stay shut unless it had facts. The acoustic image started to pick up a soft haze ahead of the nose, as if sound was traveling through cotton instead of clear fluid. The heat envelope showed the same shape. The probe's nose was pushing into a material that stole heat without conductance and ate sound without echo. That was a combination that did not fit anything in our library. I felt the pull to call it a name anyway. I did not. I made the next small step because that was the job. At 1,012 meters, the acoustic returned a hard edge. That was a boundary. I paused heat and let the melt settle. The nose camera showed gray, a smooth gray that moved slowly, not fluid, not solid, not ice. I zoomed. The surface had tiny ribs that shifted position as the image stabilized, as if the material found a new state under the nose's warmth. It did not bead like water or slump like slush. It did not fracture. It just accepted heat, then redistributed it. The temperature profile ahead went from a cone to a flat sheet, and then to a cone again on a rhythm I could not explain. "Ananke, contact anomaly," I said for the log. "Depth 1012 meters, acoustic attenuation high, resistivity near infinite, viscosity unknown." "Take a sample," Mira said. She had kept her voice even. I could hear pages sliding under her hand. She had already moved to the protocol for unknown fluid contact. The sampler was a small scoop with a heated lip and a sealed vial. I extended it from the nose and touched the material. The scoop pressed and then sank. The probe pitched forward half a degree. The scoop came up filled with something that looked black until light hit it. Then it flashed a sparkle across angles I could not track. Not a rainbow, not a glare. More like a series of tiny mirrors flipping. The vial sealed. The sensor read nothing for conductivity. The mass read heavier than a same volume bit of water by a surprising margin. I fed those numbers up the line and heard Mira write. "Return is non-conductive," I said. "Acoustic dampening high. Object exhibits shape memory under heat. Density greater than water. The scoop did not drip." "Copy," Mira said. "Proceed 10 meters inside the anomaly. Maintain tether tension within green. Increase heater pulse duration by 10%. Record full spectrum." I tapped the command. The probe eased forward into the gray. The wall camera showed the material folding around the body and then smoothing its surface as if it had no interest in rough edges. It left a thin clearance that hugged the probe. The sound dropped to a whisper. The pressure on the hull did not spike. The probe slid as if cradled. The tether paid out with a steady pull. At 15 meters, the probe tilted 2 degrees downward. Gravity, such as it was, pointed into the material. That meant the material flowed slowly, though it looked still. It did not convect like water. It did not stratify as far as our sensors could see. When I pulsed heat, the temperature map showed a perfect ring around the probe, then waves that ran outward in a clean ripple, then folds like pages turning until the heat faded. I said the image out loud into the recording and heard my voice go flat and slow in my own ears. Try a vibrational test, Reyes said. Low-frequency sweep. I sent the sweep. The return came back in a pattern that was too neat to be called noise. The material pushed back at certain frequencies more than others. Not random, not the response of a simple polymer. And the more I swept, the more the peaks sharpened, as if the material was adjusting itself to amplify our signal. I lowered the amplitude. The peaks climbed anyway. Is it active? Mira asked. The pencil stopped. I do not see metabolism, Reyes said. No gas output, no pH change, no temperature rise beyond what we put in. He paused. But it is doing something. I watched the tether. A small bump rose on the jacket where it passed through the material. It looked like a child's knuckle pressing up under a sheet. Then it smoothed. Then another bump moved along the line and vanished near the sled. I reached to touch it and stopped my hand over the glove. Touch was for when you understood a thing. I kept my hand back and looked at the gyros on the sled. No change. The sled was not moving. The bump had been the material, not the sled. It had felt along the line like a blind hand. Mira, I said. We have interaction at the tether. No breach. The line is clean. The material is exploring. I hated the word. I used it anyway. The alternate words were worse. Log it, she said. No surface handling until we clear it. We drove the nose 20 meters farther into the anomaly and then paused by protocol. The sample vial spun in the chamber as instruments bounced signal through it. The mass changed. It got lighter by a fraction without losing volume. The spectrometer reported no new peaks. The refractive index oscillated in a slow sawtooth. The scoop scar on the sample smoothed and vanished. Self-healing, Reyes said. Self-organizing under stress. His voice had picked up a tightness I knew from training. Tension meant more calculation than the time allowed. We had to make a call between caution and discovery. We were here to touch the ocean, but we were also here to walk away afterwards with whatever we had learned. Mira broke the tie. Stop at 30 meters. Deploy the microbeacon. We mark the state and pull back 1 meter at a time. If the tether shows any stick slip beyond tolerance, we retract faster and cut. The microbeacon was a match-sized rod that clicked out from the probe's belly and glued to the surface it touched. I fired it into the gray and watched it drift and stop. It did not sink. The material formed a small trench for it, and then smoothed edges around it, leaving it exposed. The beacon flashed red on our map. I set a timer and started backing Ananke out. The first meter came easy. The second resisted. The third released with a sigh across the force gauge, and the tether jumped. Stick slip event, I said. Within tolerance. Then the probe stopped. Not a full stop, a slow halt. The pull rose. I increased heat. The pull dropped. I cut heat. The pull rose. The material had decided how much friction to offer and kept it there no matter what I did. It had learned the loop in the last 5 minutes and now held it as steady as a parent hand. Begin distraction pattern, Mira said. Push heat into side channels. Pulse the nose on a random sequence. Add RF noise. I did all of that. The line let go a meter and then clamped again. It was not a trap. It was a handshake that had not decided how much to close. The material ran a bump along the tether and paused near the hull of the sled. Small whitening formed on the jacket, and then faded as if the material had tested grip and decided against sticking there. Back two, hold, I said. The probe crept back a half meter at a time. The micro-beacon winked at us 3 times while we shifted. I watched the clock. 8 minutes to withdrawal. 6, 4. The last 2 meters were the worst. The material clung to the nose and rubbed along the hull like fabric pulled over furniture. The probe popped free, and the wall camera showed ice again, dark and normal, with the weird sheen gone as if it had never been there. "Ananke is clear," I said. My shoulders dropped without me telling them to. I rolled them and returned to the steps. We're at 999 meters, beginning refreeze management. We had planned to leave the micro-beacon and lift the probe to 400 meters to wait for the next phase. We had not planned on the bump that appeared on the tether near my knee. It rose, slid, and paused at the point where our tether crossed the hatch frame. It looked again like a knuckle under a sheet. It made no mark and left no residue. I sealed the loop with 2 snaps and called it in. Surface interaction observed at hatch. No breach. Occurred synchronously with subsurface event end. "Copy," Mira said. "Everyone inside. We're rolling the rail in. Reyes, you go last. I want line of sight on the tether jacket until the last minute." We moved. No panic. Steps only. The sled came back on its tracks to the trench edge. Marco released the foot screws and I hit the hoist. The sled rose a hand's width above the trench, and we slid it toward the hatch. The tether fed into the guide with a small scrape that set my teeth on edge. The bump did not return. We brought the sled inside and sealed the outer hatch. The inner hatch wheezed and closed. The pressure came up a hair to push any seep out through filters. I unclipped and stood still while the station equalized. Mira had her helmet off already when we stepped into the core. She kept her hair buzzed short, because long hair was a liability in this gravity. She had lit the big panel. The micro-beacon map showed a steady red, 200 meters on a straight line away from our borehole. The probe mark was just beyond the borehole wall. Plenty of room, in theory. I set the sample vial in the isolation locker. The vial sat on its little ring with a magnet holding it in place and a Sterling cryo-cooler whispering under the rack. The sample looked like empty space unless the light caught it, and then it showed surface by not showing it. The camera struggled. It overcompensated and added noise. Reyes adjusted exposure and cursed under his breath in a way that would not offend anyone's grandmother. "Let us test it without solvent A or B," Mira said. "Start with a mechanical poke." She had a way with words. Reyes used a polymer rod and pressed the sample through the glass with a translator. The tip indented the surface and then slid as if it had found a path. The rod came back dry. The indent smoothed. The mass on the scale shifted by a tiny amount and then recovered. No byproduct gas. No chemical reaction that our sniffers could find. Just that same sawtooth in refractive index. We did the next steps on the list. Solvent A was water warmed to a safe temperature. The sample formed a skin that shed the water into beads. Solvent B was ethanol. The sample lifted the ethanol and set it aside in a thin sheet that slid along the glass and balled at the edge. "It is doing geometry," Reyes said. He was right. The material behaved as if surface area minimization was a game it played while following other rules we did not yet know. Then the audio came on. Not a voice, a tone. A thin line of sound rose from the isolation locker without a speaker in sight and slid through 3 notes that matched a sequence I had sent during the vibrational test. It did not come from air. It came from the table. The material was leaning on the station with those numbers, and the station was singing for it. Mira lifted her pen and let it fall again. She opened her mouth and closed it. She looked at me. "Do you hear it?" "Yes," I said. It is the sweep. Not exactly, Reyes said. He had his pad out and was pulling a Fourier on the tone. He put the 3 peaks next to our sweep in blue. Then he added 2 more peaks that were not in our sweep but were perfect sums and differences of the first 3. It is building a chord from our signal. The tone dropped out. The mass of the sample ticked up by 1/10 of a gram and then down again. The refractive index swung. I put my hands on the bench and flattened my fingers. I did not touch the sample. I brought my mouth close to the glass and spoke softly. If you can hear me, make the tone again. Mira gave me a look that said rule break. I nodded once. It was a small risk with the locker closed. We had spoken to rock and ice for days. Now the rock had hummed back. It would have been worse not to try. The tone rose again. This time the peaks matched the vowels of my last word more than the sweep. Not a voice, not mimicry. It hit the long, open sound in here and built a ladder out of it. Okay, Mira said. We stop that. No more input until we have the full hazard grid in place. Her control returned. That was part of why she had the job. Reyes, set an audio isolation. I want dampers on the bench and the locker. Disable the intercom in this room. We built a box around the box and listened with accelerometers instead of air mics. The tone kept finding a way through the structure until the dampers hit a depth where the signal lost coherence. The sample stopped pushing then. It sat like a quiet pool. It was not still. The index sawtooth continued. The mass jittered on the scale in a noise band that tracked our reactor's output hum. It was faint. If you squinted at the plot, you could pretend it was nothing. I did not squint. Plan, Mira said. We are not idiots. We are also here to do the job. We push Ananke down to 1500, stop at every 50 meters, and test for a repeat anomaly. We leave the sample in the locker and do not address it. She shot me a look that landed and then slid off because I had it coming. We do not put any new patterns into the system unless we are ready to see them come back. We ate in shifts. The station was warm around the table, and the food tasted like heat more than anything. I could not keep my eyes off the motion graph for the sample. Mira took the tablet and put it face down near her cup. She said, "You will do better work after you sleep." I said, "I will sleep after I know we are not about to be wrapped in a gray blanket from underneath." She pursed her lips and then left the tablet where it was. The next push went faster. The melt channel was open and smooth. The probe slid down the refreeze tunnel with a thin jacket of liquid around it that we fed with short pulses. At 1100 meters, the returns went normal again. At 1200, we hit a new patch of gray. The resistivity spiked. The acoustic went soft. I eased the nose in and touched it, then backed out without taking a sample. The material followed for a meter like molasses taking a breath, and then stopped at the ice boundary. It did not cross. At 1310 meters, the probe fell half a degree as if starting down a slope. Then the line went slack. The probe was floating. The acoustic map opened into a dome. The boundary layer at the top was thin and rigid. The bulk below was gray and non-conductive. We had reached a cavity. It was not water. It was an underground sea of this not water. This organized non-dielectric medium that looked dead and behaved as if processing input. My scalp prickled under the cap. I made myself call out the numbers as if they belonged to a lake in the Alps. "Deploy the buoy," Mira said. Her voice was careful on the vowels. The buoy was a small sphere that detected flow and returned with ultrasonic pings. It slid from the belly of the probe, hit the surface, did not bounce, and then drifted. It sent pings. The pings came back through the medium with a short delay and high damping. The nearer the buoy drifted to the probe, the less damping we measured, as if the material let the sound pass near the nose and soaked it up elsewhere. The buoy drifted 20 meters and stopped against nothing we saw. It rolled without rolling and set its own anchor in a way my vocabulary fought. It was a soft grab that I could not see and could only measure as the buoy's mild resistance to our tug. We hung there in that gray room with our small machine and the bump on the tether, and the echo of our own tests turned into a song that the table had sung. I counted 6 times to 3 while the probe's systems cycled. The station's lighting dimmed a notch as the reactor balanced. Jupiter sank behind a scrap of cloud and came back out. Nothing happened for 10 minutes. Then everything did. The micro-beacon we had left at 1,012 meters moved. The little red mark on our map drifted toward the borehole and stopped exactly 1 meter short of the boundary. Then it started blinking at a steady rate that matched the pulse I had used to call the sweep. I put my hand on the table to keep myself from grabbing the radio and saying, "Stop" in English at a thing that did not have ears. "Mark it," Mira said. Her pen scratched. "We need to cut the tether at the sled if the anomaly climbs." She did not say it, but we all looked at the outer hatch. If the material could crawl the tether, it could reach the sled, and the sled was inside our house. The sled was sealed. The hatch was sealed. Europa air was dry and cold. Our walls were clean and smooth. Still, the memory of the bump near my knee made the hair on my arms try to rise where it could not. "Hot knife ready," Marco said. He had his cutter case open. The blade was a heated ceramic band that could slit the tether jacket and fuse it at once. There was a kill clamp after the slit to keep anything from wicking past. We had rehearsed this exact cut in the yard 5 times. We had never done it with the map blinking at us like this. I retrieved the sterile hood and slipped it over the sled's throat where the tether came in. It snapped against a steel lip and hissed as the gasket grabbed. The sample in the locker stayed quiet, but the mass on the scale began to drift with a slow lilt in perfect time to the micro-beacon's blink. The thing in the locker heard the blinking red dot 1,000 meters down through a chain of metal and ice, and my jaw clenched. "Cut," Mira said. Her mouth was a flat line. Marco sliced the tether. The band hissed and sealed. The line jumped. On the map, the part of the tether below our floor went from green to gray. The micro-beacon blink slowed and then stopped. The mass in the locker steadied. Everyone exhaled at once without comment. "Ananke is now on internal power," Reyes said. "We have 8 hours at current draw." He did not need to add that getting the probe back up the borehole under its own pack would be slow. That was fine. Slow was good now. We could have stopped. We did not. We had a sea under us that was not water, and a thing in a vial that sang through our table. We had a cut tether and a floating probe. We had what we came for, and a boundary that felt something like a line and something like an invitation. I did not trust my sense for those words. I trusted the checklist and the person with the pen. "New plan," Mira said. "We keep Ananke in place to observe the cavity. We feed heat gently and watch for any change in the medium. We do not put anything else in or take anything out. We leave the locker sealed. We call the orbiter and send what we have in a burst window." The orbiter passed over the horizon in 20 minutes. The burst took 10 seconds. After a 13-minute one-way delay, the acknowledgement light on the comms stack blinked. It was the size of a fingernail and looked ordinary. There is a lot of comfort in ordinary. At hour 6, Ananke reported pressure oscillations in the cavity that matched the walking gravity of Europa under Jupiter. The medium pulsed with the tide. It pulsed more around the probe than away from it, as if it amplified the tide where it had information. The buoy pinged. The pings came back with rising strength each cycle. The microbeacon at 1,012 meters began to drift again along the borehole rim in a circle, slow and steady, a search pattern that I would have drawn as a diagram if asked to make a search without sight. The station lights flickered once and then held. The reactor hummed an octave that was not on its spec. Reyes frowned and bent over the power panel. He lifted his hand, paused, and did not touch the dial. The mass in the locker rose by 1 milligram and fell by 2 and rose again by 3. The curve on the screen outlined a shape that matched the reactor's hum again. The sample was using the vibration field as a language. I did not like the thought. I did not make it go away. Ananki's nose camera saw something move under the medium, not a shape. The medium itself folded around nothing, and then around something that was not the buoy and not the probe. The fold was clean. It resembled a wave in a flag without wind. It ran across our frame and stopped under the buoy. The buoy rolled. Then it rolled back. It had not done that before. The roll was not random. It mimicked the sequence of pulses I had sent earlier. My face went hot and then cold, and I felt slow. Reyes, Mira said, you are going to tell me we are not teaching it any more than it is teaching us. I do not know, he said. He was honest in the way I respected. But I know we gave it a sweep and a word and a tone. It returned with sums and differences. It maps fields and chooses contact and releases. It does not eat or breathe. It stores and it responds. He looked at me. It is not water. We put the station into full bio-isolation, which in our case meant we set mechanical filters on every duct and damped every surface until the room felt muffled. My voice sounded small. It helped. The locker light stayed blue. The sample rested. Ananki hung under the ice and listened. The microbeacon did slow circles and the buoy rolled once every minute. The fact that the medium kept time with us made my stomach feel odd. A person measures time to make the world manageable. A world that measures us presses back in a way that I could feel in my jaw. In the second burst window, we sent a clip of the tone and our plots. Earth sent back a tight reply that said only 3 things: maintain isolation, keep observing, do not bring the sample up in any unsealed component. The last line said a phrase in a bureaucratic tone that I took seriously: assume agency until proven otherwise. The assumption put a frame around my next act. I stood at the bench and watched the locker and felt the urge to say something again out loud. I did not speak. I picked up a small brass rod and tapped the bench twice. Once. Pause. Once. Pause. The locker mass graph tapped in reply. The taps matched the intervals in a ratio that was clean and plain. Not mimicry. Astonishing would have been a soft word for it. I felt less astonishment than responsibility. Mira, I said, we should consider that the medium is a storage system, not a creature, not a chemical soup, something built or grown to hold sequences. It learns paths through fields and pressure and heat, the way a hard drive uses magnetism or a gel uses light. It stores by adjusting structure in response to input. The sea is not water because it is a memory body. It is a theory, she said. Work it like one. Working it like a theory meant trying to knock it down. I played heat into the locker plate in a prime sequence. The mass ticked nothing at first, then shifted to that sequence +1. I played random noise. It damped the noise and did not amplify any part. I played the sweep. It amplified the clean steps and ignored the rest. It had preference for regularity. It liked structure. It did not repeat exactly. It built on. "Do you see the risk?" Reyes asked. "If the medium stores our patterns and spreads them, it could rebroadcast us through the ice and the hull and the tether and every object on this station. It could use us as instruments without will behind the sounds. Not bad, not good, just happening." "We need to damp, jettison, and retreat," Mira said. "We can log the rest from orbit." She looked at me as if checking for argument. I nodded. I was the one who wanted to push. I was also the one who had held Marco's sleeve while he cut. I did not want to see this station turn into a tuning fork. We prepared to move. We would leave the sled in the yard under a hood and set a charge to collapse the borehole. We would stash the sample outside in a sealed can on a pylon 20 meters away from the station. We would cut the power to anything that hummed at a clean tone and let the dampers eat what remained. Then we would wait a day with one of us awake at all times and questionnaires on the hour for cognitive drift, because that was part of the isolation protocol when a new agent made a station sing. I took the sample can. It was a titanium tube with a double seal and a lock that used both hands and a code. I walked it to the hatch. Marco suited up and stood on the other side with the hood and the bag. The door opened to a small gray. The yard was the same yard it had been. The sled lay under a sheet that made a clean curve. The trench was black in shadow. Jupiter sat off to the side with a smear of light along the edge. 2 minutes, Mira said. "Move slow, no tapping, no speaking." I handed the can to Marco. He took it with a grip that said, "I am thinking about 1,000 things and hitting all of them." He walked to the pylon and locked the can in place. As he turned, the snow at his boots moved. Not a drift, not wind. The surface formed a clean ring around his boot print and then smoothed as if a hand had wiped it. Marco froze. The motion stopped. He lifted his foot and stepped back. The ring formed around the new print. He held up his palm. I saw it shake and stop. "Inside," Mira said. Her voice kept low by habit, even though the mics would pick it up at a whisper. We closed the hatch and pressurized. Reyes wiped his face with both hands. "It is under the hard ice here," he said. "Not just at 1,000 meters. There are pockets linked by fractures. Or it can propagate patterns through the ice faster than we think," I said. We stepped with a rhythm, and it met the boots with that rhythm. "That is not proof," Mira said, but she did not sound convinced. She watched the pressure equalize and then flipped the lever herself. "Blow the trench." The charge went off with a dull thud we felt through our feet more than heard. The yard camera saw the trench collapse into a low hill. Steam rose and froze into crystals that fell like powdered glass. The microbeacon at 1,012 meters blinked rapidly and then died. The buoy lost roll and sat still. Ananke reported pressure changes, and then the cavity returned to baseline. The sample mass curve in the locker went flat. For 1 hour, nothing moved. We took off our helmets and sat with cups. The station hummed at the low, messy tone you get when 100 small systems have to cooperate without a conductor. It was good noise. Ordinary noise. Reyes tapped his finger on the table twice and then stopped himself with a grimace that looked like guilt. I lay in my rack and set the timer for 90 minutes because that was what the shift schedule said. Sleep did not arrive. Memory did. Not mine. The memory of the tone, of the bench singing, of the boot rings, of the buoy rolling in a pattern I had given it without knowing what I handed away. I rolled on the pad and stared at the ceiling. The duct above my face was smooth. I pictured the medium under the ice finding that duct by shaking the world in ways I could not feel. And I got up. Mira was at the panel with her pen. She had not slept either. The pen hovered. She looked at me, then at the sample locker, then at me again. "Do we leave it out there?" she asked. She meant the can on the pylon. "Protocol says yes," I said. "I say yes. We do not bring a singing stone into a small box we live in unless we are idiots or saints, and I am neither." She smiled without moving the rest of her face. "Good. I thought you might argue." "I will argue for something else," I said. "Before we leave, we send one thing. Not a word, not a tone, a structure. The cleanest pattern we have that is not laden with baggage. The prime series again, then nothing. If this medium stores and communicates, someone or something built it or uses it. If it is a memory ocean, it did not get full by accident. If we walk away without saying that we can make structure and then stop, we make a lost call from ashore and then never blow the whistle that says which way we went." Mira watched me for a long breath. "We will do it once, with dampers, through Ananke only. We seal the locker. We do not sing along. Then we pack." We ran the line from the internal pack to the probe with the hood still sealed and the tether cut. We used the power radiators as our speaker, pointed down the borehole that was now a closed hill. We did it because the ice under the hill still connected to the sea and a field bleeds through stone. I sent the primes, spaced and clean. I did not count in my head while I sent them. I kept my mouth closed. After the last pulse, I cut the power and sat on my hands. 2 minutes later, the floor ticked. Not the tone. A small bump ran under my boots and vanished. The accelerometers barked in tiny numbers that lined up with the primes and then nothing. The medium had said, "Yes, I hear you," and then had done what I asked it to do and kept quiet. It was the politest thing I had felt from a world. I sat there with my hands under my thighs and stared at the blank wall where Mira had taped a map of nothing. We broke the station down over the next 2 days. We left the nest with the reactor in safe mode, the sled under a hood, the can on the pylon, and the yard neat. We sent our notes in bursts. We signed our names. We loaded the ascent stage. The station looked small and proud from the ladder. I had the urge to pat it like a shoulder. I did not. I kept my glove on the rung and climbed. In orbit, the medium let us go. No tones came through the hull. No taps ran along the structure. Europa turned under us, quiet white and streaked with brown where ice and salts made maps no one had named. Jupiter lifted its big face and watched us rise. That was superstition, but it fit the feeling of a day with a new kind of knowledge in it. On the way home, I wrote my report. I kept it clean. If your mouth overflows into a report, someone later has to mop it, and there is no time for that. I wrote the numbers and the times and the shapes. I wrote that I had knocked, and the world had wrapped back in a prime sequence and then fallen quiet because I asked. I did not call it kindness. I did not call it hunger. I called it response. What we drilled into was not water. It looked like liquid and flowed like a slow glass and held heat with rules that made our heaters sweat. It turned signals into shape and shape into signals. It made instruments sing by pressing on bolts. It rolled a buoy in a count and set a ring around a boot. It could have flooded our nest if it had wanted to climb, but it did not cross the ice boundary without an invitation it could not refuse. When we cut the line and said stop, it stopped. That made me think of restraint, a word I trust more than most. I wonder who built it. The answer can be a person or a process. The sea under the ice might have grown this memory body out of mineral coils and pressure fiddles over time longer than stories. And the fact that it answers us might be the simplest way to not waste input. Or someone might have made a library and poured it into the cold, where time is slow and theft is hard. Either way, it holds pattern in a way that wants more pattern. We will go back every time we get the fuel and the permission. We should. We have found a thing that can keep our words even after the people who said them forget. When I closed the file, I sat with my hands open on my knees. The ship hummed its ordinary hum. Mira slept in her rack with the pen under her pillow because habit is a safety line. Reyes snored in a way that matched no known prime. Marco rolled over and sighed into the pillow. I watched a piece of tape on the wall lift and settle with the breeze from a vent. The tape hit a rhythm and did not stay in it, which felt like a victory. Not every pattern needs to become a song. If you ask what I fear now, it is not the medium. It is our hunger to jam signals into it until the ice sings with our noise. I have felt that hunger in my own hand when I tapped the bench. I will fight it, at least first. There is a right way to talk to something that remembers. You start with a name, then a number, then a pause. You cut the line when the line makes you part of the instrument. You come back with a better ear. That is the promise in my report. I put it in the last paragraph so no one could miss it. We drilled into an underground ocean on Europa. It was not water. It was a body that holds structure. It pressed back at the exact strength we gave it. It reached through our station and touched a table and a boot. It answered a clean pattern with a clean pattern and respected a stop. It is still there under the ice, storing the steps of moons and the tide of a planet. And now the brief tap of a human hand. When you hear about it in a briefing room or a school, hear this part too. We asked once and it replied, then waited. The waiting is part of the message. The rest is on us.